Your grandmother could stretch a chicken across 3 meals and still have bones left for soup, but you can't make it 2 weeks without DoorDash. That's not an insult. That's a fact. And it's not entirely your fault. You were raised in a world designed to make you forget the skills that kept people alive when the system collapsed. Skills that seemed obsolete, old-fashioned, embarrassingly cheap. Skills your great-grandparents knew by heart because they lived through a decade when knowing them meant the difference between eating and starving. We threw those skills away because we thought we'd never need them again. We thought we'd evolved past survival. We were wrong. There's a rulebook that existed in the 1930s, not written down, not taught in schools. It was passed from mother to daughter, father to son, whispered across kitchen tables and back porches. A set of habits so deeply ingrained that an entire generation lived by them without thinking, and then we forgot them. Deliberately. Systematically. Because forgetting was profitable. And now we're paying the price. Let me show you what we lost. The year is 1933. You're standing in a kitchen in Cleveland, Ohio. It's 6 in the morning and it's cold. Not just outside. Inside, too. Because the family that lives here can't afford to heat the whole house, so they heat one room, the kitchen. That's where life happens. The coal stove in the corner is burning, but barely. Just enough to cook and keep the chill from killing you. The woman standing at that stove is 32 years old but looks 50. Her hands are cracked and red from washing everything by hand in cold water because hot water costs coal and coal costs money they don't have. She's making breakfast. Not the breakfast you imagine. There's no bacon, no eggs, unless the chicken laid one yesterday. No toast, because bread is precious, and you don't waste it on breakfast when it needs to last all week. She's making flour gravy. That's it. Flour browned in the smallest amount of lard, mixed with water and a pinch of salt. Poured over a biscuit if they have biscuits. Eaten with a spoon if they don't. Her husband will eat it before he walks 4 miles to see if the factory is hiring today. It probably isn't. But he'll walk anyway because not trying is worse than failing. Her 3 kids will split 1 bowl of oatmeal. The oats are stretched with water to make them go further. There's no sugar, maybe a spoonful of molasses if they're lucky. The kids don't complain. Not because they're not hungry. They're always hungry. But they learned not to complain because complaining doesn't create food. It just makes their mother's face do that thing where she looks like she's about to break. After breakfast, the woman doesn't throw anything away. The pot that held the oatmeal, she'll scrape every molecule of food from it and add hot water to make a thin gruel for lunch. The coffee grounds from yesterday, she'll run water through them again. It barely tastes like coffee anymore, but it's warm and brown and that's close enough. Nothing gets wasted. Not the smallest crumb. Not the tablespoon of bacon grease. Not the bones from last Sunday's chicken that are currently simmering on the back of the stove for the 3rd time because there's still nutrition in there if you're patient. This isn't a story about one family. This is every family. This is normal. This is what survival looked like when the bottom dropped out and 50 million people had to remember how to be poor. You think you understand the Great Depression because you learned about it in school. You saw the photographs, men in bread lines, dust storms, families piled into jalopies heading west. But those images don't tell you what it felt like to live it. They don't tell you about the grinding, daily humiliation of not having enough. The calculations that filled every waking moment. Can we afford soap this week, or do we make it ourselves? Can the kids go to school, or do they need to work? Can we heat the bedroom, or do we all sleep in the kitchen? Do we fix the shoes, or do we stuff cardboard in them for another month? The Depression didn't just take people's money. It took their illusions. The illusion that hard work guarantees success. The illusion that the system protects you. The illusion that tomorrow will be better than today. When those illusions died, something else took their place. A cold, hard practicality. A way of living that assumed nothing and wasted nothing. A set of rules that kept you alive when everything else failed. And for 20 years, Those rules defined American life. Even after the Depression ended, even after the war brought prosperity, the people who lived through the 30s couldn't shake the habits. They were too deeply carved into their souls. They saved everything. They fixed everything. They used things until they fell apart, and then they fixed them again. They viewed waste as a moral failure. Throwing away food wasn't just foolish, it was a sin. My grandmother kept bread bags, every single one, washed them, dried them, folded them into a drawer, used them for decades. She saved aluminum foil, smoothed it flat, reused it until it disintegrated. She had a drawer full of string, pieces of string from packages rolled into neat little balls. When I asked her why, she looked at me like I was insane. "You never know when you'll need string," she said. And she was right. She always had string when she needed it. She never had to buy it. Not once in 60 years. That sounds crazy to you. It sounds obsessive. But it wasn't crazy to her. It was wisdom, survival wisdom, the kind of knowledge that keeps you alive when the money runs out and the store shelves are empty and you're on your own. Let me tell you what else they knew. They knew how to cook from scratch. Not cooking like you think of cooking, where you open a package of something and heat it up. Real cooking. Taking raw ingredients and turning them into meals. Flour into bread, milk into butter, vegetables into preserves, chicken feet into soup. They knew how to take the parts of animals that grocery stores throw away now and turn them into food that kept their families alive. They knew how to sew. Not decorative sewing, repair sewing, turning worn-out clothes into usable clothes. A shirt with holes in the elbows became a shirt with patches. When the patches wore out, the fabric became rags. When the rags wore out, they became stuffing for quilts. Nothing died until it was truly dead. A woman could take a dress she'd worn for 10 years and remake it into a dress for her daughter. Then remake that dress into a smaller dress when her daughter outgrew it. Then turn the scraps into a doll's dress. 3 generations of use from one piece of fabric. They knew how to grow food. Not gardening as a hobby, gardening as survival. Every house had a vegetable garden. Not because people loved gardening. Because produce was expensive and growing your own meant you ate. They knew which plants grew in shade, which needed sun, how to save seeds from one year to plant the next, how to can and preserve food so the summer harvest lasted through winter. A family with a good garden could save $30 or $40 a year on food. That was real money. That was the difference between keeping the lights on and sitting in the dark. They knew how to preserve food without refrigeration, because most people didn't have refrigerators in the 30s. They had ice boxes if they were lucky. Nothing if they weren't. So they learned to cure meat with salt, smoke, fish, ferment vegetables, store root vegetables in cellars. They could make food last months without it spoiling. Modern people can't keep lettuce fresh for 5 days. They knew how to fix things, everything, furniture, tools, clothes, shoes, appliances. When something broke, you didn't throw it away and buy a new one. You couldn't afford to, so you fixed it. And if you couldn't fix it, you knew someone who could. Every neighborhood had a guy who fixed radios, a guy who fixed shoes, a guy who could sharpen any blade. These weren't businesses. These were survival skills shared among people who understood that they needed each other. They knew how to barter. Money was scarce, so people traded. You had extra eggs? Trade them for flour. You could fix a car? Trade your labor for a bushel of apples. The economy of the Depression wasn't just about dollars. It was about relationships and reciprocity. People helped each other because they knew they'd need help eventually. It wasn't charity. It was insurance. They knew how to entertain themselves without spending money. No cable TV, no streaming services, no internet, no smartphones. Entertainment was reading the same books over and over, playing cards, listening to the radio if you could afford the electricity, telling stories, singing songs. People talked to each other, actually talked, for hours, because it was free and it passed the time and it reminded you that you weren't alone. These weren't special skills. This was just life. Every adult knew how to do these things. It wasn't remarkable. It was required. And it worked. It kept millions of families alive through the worst economic collapse in modern history. And then we forgot it all. Here's what happened. The war ended. The economy exploded. Suddenly there were jobs everywhere. Factories running 3 shifts. Wages rising. New products flooding the market. Convenience became available. Canned food, frozen food, ready-made clothes, prepackaged everything. And people who'd spent 15 years living on scraps decided they were done. Done with deprivation. Done with making everything from scratch. Done with fixing and mending and stretching every penny. They wanted ease. They'd earned it. So they started buying convenience. At first, it was small things. A loaf of store-bought bread instead of homemade. A ready-made shirt instead of one sewn at home. It felt like luxury. It felt like they'd finally made it. But convenience has a cost beyond money. Every time you buy something instead of making it, you lose the skill to make it. And once the skill is gone, you're dependent on the store. You need them, and they know it. The corporations that emerged in the post-war boom understood something crucial. People with skills are dangerous. Not physically dangerous, economically dangerous. A person who can grow their own food doesn't need the grocery store. A person who can sew their own clothes doesn't need the mall. A person who can fix their own car doesn't need the dealership. Skills equal independence, and independence is bad for business. So they launched a propaganda campaign that lasted decades. They didn't call it propaganda. They called it advertising. But the message was clear. Modern people don't make things. They buy things. Making things yourself is old-fashioned, embarrassing, a sign that you can't afford better. Real success means paying someone else to do everything for you. They sold convenience as status. The family that bought frozen dinners wasn't lazy. They were modern, progressive. They had better things to do than slave over a stove. The man who hired a mechanic wasn't incompetent. He was successful, too important to waste time under a hood. The woman who bought clothes instead of sewing them wasn't frivolous. She was liberated, free from the drudgery her mother endured. And it worked. Within a generation, the skills that had kept people alive became obsolete. Mothers stopped teaching daughters to sew because why bother? You can buy clothes cheaper than you can make them. Fathers stopped teaching sons to fix things because everything's under warranty. Just take it to the shop. Gardens disappeared because produce is cheap and convenient, and you don't have to get your hands dirty. Cooking became opening packages. Fixing became replacing. Making became buying. By the 1980s, the transformation was complete. An entire society had voluntarily given up their survival skills in exchange for convenience. And once those skills were gone, people became completely dependent on the system. You need food? Go to the store. Your car breaks? Call a tow truck. Your clothes rip? Buy new ones. The sink leaks? Call a plumber. Every problem has a professional solution. Every solution costs money. And if you don't have money, you're helpless. That's not an accident. That's the design. A population that can't take care of itself is a population that must participate in the economy. They have no choice. They need their jobs because they need money, because they need to buy everything, because they don't know how to make anything. It's the perfect trap, and we walked into it willingly because they made dependency look like progress. Think about what you can't do. Can you grow food? Really grow it? Enough to feed yourself for a month? Can you preserve that food so it lasts? Can you fix your car, not change the oil? Actually fix it when something breaks? Can you sew? Can you repair your own clothes? Do you even know what your clothes are made of? Can you cook a meal from raw ingredients without looking up a recipe? Can you make bread? Can you sharpen a knife? Can you patch a hole in your wall? Most people can't do any of this. Not because they're stupid, because they were never taught. Their parents weren't taught either. 2 generations removed from necessity. 2 generations of trading skills for convenience. And now those skills are gone, extinct, and the people who possess them are dying off. The last time I saw my grandmother before she died, she was 93 years old. Her mind was still sharp. Her hands still worked. She was crocheting a blanket. I asked her why. She had a closet full of blankets. She didn't need another one. She looked at me with those Depression-era eyes and said, "You never know." And she was right. You never know. But she knew how to prepare for you never know. And I don't. None of us do. Here's what scares me. We're not as far from collapse as we think we are. The system is fragile. The supply chains are fragile. The economy is fragile. We live in a just-in-time world where grocery stores stock 3 days of food and gas stations assume the trucks will always arrive on schedule. Everything depends on everything else working perfectly all the time. And when it doesn't, when there's a pandemic or a natural disaster or a financial crisis, the shelves empty in hours, and people panic because they don't know what to do. They never learned how to go without. They never learned how to make do. The people who lived through the Depression knew how to handle scarcity. It was their default. They didn't panic when times got hard because hard times were normal. They just tightened their belts and used the skills they'd been using their whole lives. But we don't have those skills anymore. We're soft, dependent, fragile. And when the next crisis comes, and it will come, we're going to realize how much we lost when we traded survival knowledge for convenience. So what do? How do you relearn a century of forgotten wisdom? You start small, you start simple, you learn one skill at a time. You start cooking real food from scratch. Not because it's trendy, because it's practical. You learn what food actually costs when you make it yourself. You learn how much money you're wasting on convenience. You start fixing small things. Learn how to sew a button, patch a hole, sharpen a blade, fix a leaky faucet. Every repair you do yourself is money you keep and a skill you gain. You plant something, even if it's just herbs in a window box. You learn how things grow, how long they take, what they need. You start understanding where food comes from. You start appreciating what your ancestors knew. You save things, not everything. You're not trying to become your grandmother, but you stop throwing away things that still have use. That jar, you can reuse it. That box, it's storage. That piece of fabric, it's a rag. You stop being so quick to trash things and replace them. You learn to buy quality instead of quantity. One good knife instead of a drawer full of garbage. One well-made coat instead of 3 cheap ones. Things that last. Things you can repair. Things that don't need to be replaced every year. You slow down. You start thinking about purchases instead of impulse buying. You ask yourself if you really need it or if you just want it because everyone else has it. You build relationships with your neighbors. You learn what they're good at. You share skills. You help each other. Because that's what communities used to do. That's what they'll have to do again when things get hard. You stop outsourcing every problem to professionals and start solving problems yourself. You reclaim your independence one skill at a time. This isn't about living in the past. It's not about going back to the Depression. It's about remembering that there was wisdom in that era that we threw away too quickly. Skills that kept people alive. Habits that built resilience. A mindset that didn't panic when times got hard because it knew how to survive hard times. Your great-grandparents weren't better than you. They weren't smarter. They weren't tougher. They just knew things you don't know. They knew how to live with less, how to make things last, how to depend on themselves instead of the system, and they survived. They raised families and built lives in conditions that would break most modern people in a week. That knowledge isn't gone. It's just sleeping, waiting for the moment when we need it again. And we will need it. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year. But someday the trucks will stop running, or the power will stay off, or the money will run out, and you'll be alone with whatever skills you have. And on that day, you'll wish your grandmother had taught you how to make soup from bones and grow food in bad soil and fix things with wire and determination. The Depression generation is almost gone. The last survivors are in their 90s now. Soon they'll all be dead. And when they die, they'll take their knowledge with them unless we start learning it now. Unless we start asking questions. Unless we start practicing skills that seem obsolete until the moment you desperately need them and don't have them. You can't change the past. You can't undo decades of forgotten knowledge. But you can start remembering. One skill at a time. One habit at a time. One small act of self-reliance at a time. Because the system that taught you to be dependent, it's not as stable as it pretends to be. And the people who survive what comes next won't be the ones with the most money or the best jobs or the biggest houses. They'll be the ones who remember how to take care of themselves when everything else falls apart. Your grandmother knew this. Her mother knew it. Their mothers knew it. It's time you learned it too.